Good morning, colleagues. Everyone's naturally quietened down. I think they must have realised as we are approaching 9:30. I think I can get us going. And in doing so, I can say a very, very warm welcome to this Council of Governors meeting being held here in the South of England showground. We put on the special weather, obviously, and got that pre-arranged. It does look absolutely beautiful coming in. So you are all most welcome. Just to remind colleagues that this is a meeting in public. Members of the public both and staff who have joined us this morning are most welcome, and also those joining us on the screen, but it's not a public meeting. So just to go through apologies for absence, we've had those from Paul Brockenhurst, Max Puller, Linda Kane, Andrew Latham, and then just hearing that Anne Osler is en route, but I think everyone else managed to get here on time. Then, there you are.
Can I just add Nick Harrison? He's not able to join us today.
All right, thanks very much, Kirsty. Thank you. Then I have the point of declarations of interest, always very important for us to be able to have the pause point. We know that our declarations of interest are available in written form, but I also pause during the meeting to be able to see if anyone has any particular additional items that they want to raise. And that pause point is there. If not, then we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, and there have been no amendments advised in advance. So I don't know if people have been looking at them on the train or as part of their bedtime reading to be able to bring anything further. If not, we need to be able to have a decision to be able to approve those minutes. If we get, I can see there's a nod around the table, so I'm taking that. Thanks, Lee, as well, to be able to do that. And then to be able to say our action log / matters arising. And I think the one I have here is that the digital strategy is due to be approved by the board in October, and then the CDIO, Chief Digital and Information Officer, will run a session with the COG on this and its specific ambitions. And I have to say, it'll be a good paper. It's some really Stephen's done some absolutely great work on that. So I'm sure you will all be very interested to hear about that, and that will be an update on that to the COG in December. So that then takes us on to governance and the Membership Development Committee report. And I think,
Peter Shaw.
So if I can open that for Peter to be able to present on.
Thank you, Chairman. Take it as read. Obviously, just a couple of points to highlight. Perhaps there, we're discussing and developing ways of having more contact and interaction with our public members. We've organised so far 2 online events, and we're looking to arrange a 3rd in November. One thing to say there is if the Trust want members to know something and they want us to carry that message, bear in mind that we're developing that side of things, and please tell us if there are things that you want us to be asking members about. The other thing in terms of membership development, just to mention since we're here, we've honed our resources down to running 4 events a year where we attend events and seek to talk to the public, sign them up for members if they want to be, but much more just talk to them. We had a very successful day here earlier in the year. There were a few more people, a lot more animals than there are today. But and our next one is on Sunday at at Brooklands, and there are two others that we do through the year. So those points I wanted to raise, obviously happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. If I open it up, any questions? Also, and thoughts and reflections. I've got at the top, please. Yes, sorry, Martin. No, I did.
All right, good, thank you. Yes, I mean, I just wanted to raise this because I think I circulated to all of you some pictures that I took at the Edenbridge and Oxted show, which has an attendance over the August bank holiday weekend of something in excess of 20,000 people. And they have a designated area, which they call actually on their map, on their plan of the site, 999 area, which consists of acres of policemen, acres of firemen, and 2 or 3 paramedics attending on their own, in their own time, unpaid, without toil, who the firemen provide lunch for. Now, I know that there's the decision was made not to attend this, but it is the second biggest event in the Seacam area after the South England show, and it doesn't look good. And these paramedics, personally speaking, they do it year after year, and if an opportunity comes to put them forward for some kind of recognition, like the annual recognition events that we have, I certainly should be doing so, because I feel that they are unrecognised. I went along last year on my own. Another governor came for 2 hours and had the stall there. And this year I wanted to go along to, just temporarily, to firstly see the 128 acres that this site covers, because I couldn't last year, and also just to let them know that someone was interested in what they're doing. So I would really like to challenge, not to put it too strongly, the decision not to attend this event properly next year.
Thanks, Martin, and that's something that I've certainly been made aware of, and I think these discussions about the priorities and where to put our energies and efforts, and you make the point very well in terms of saying it's the second largest event in the Seacam area, and being able to make that decision. I just ask in terms of the planning for next year, because obviously we cannot move for this year, but the planning for next year. Peter, did you want to?
Can I? Yeah. So thank you, Martin. So after Martin's note about the event that he mentions, had a discussion, and we've got a meeting with our comms engagement and our patient and public involvement teams, I think next week, just to plan out for the year ahead the events that we should prioritise, and we'll obviously come back to governors on that. As Martin refers to, earlier in the year we made a decision with governors to prioritise 4 events in the year, but maybe this event that's been mentioned, maybe this is the one of those that we should be prioritising for next year.
Thanks, Peter. I think to give it, Martin, just to give it good consideration, I think you make a good point. I think also, to be able to see we don't need to go to the same events each year, so it's a large geography, and I think these public engagement events are very, very helpful. Are very useful. They're about profile raising in terms of being able to get governance in, and being able to also engage with our strategy. So I certainly absolutely see it. So hopefully, do you feel, Martin, that the point's been heard and will be taken on board when that meeting takes place? Any other questions or points on that? If not, then back to you again, Peter, on the Governor Development Committee report.
Thank you, Chair. This one, I report on behalf of Andrew Latham, Lead Governor, who is not able to be here today. Again, take the report as read, and most governors will be familiar in any case with it. Perhaps just to mention that there are lots of opportunities offered by this trust, I think much more than any other trust I've been aware of, for governors to attend, for example, the health and safety audits and visits, the quality visits and so on. Extremely interesting we're always made very welcome. We're treated as equal to everybody else there, and it's a rewarding experience. So if anybody hasn't or wants to do some more, I think there's a new calendar going out for next year where you can identify the events and go through the normal process to put your name down. So just a plug there on that. But otherwise, happy to take questions.
Thanks again on that, Peter. And I just add to that, very, very cognizant of the fact that as governors, you have so many calls on your time, and that this is an additional role and it's an unremunerated role. And we're very grateful for the amount of commitment that you put in to be able to understand how CCAM is working, what it's doing, to be able to provide that assurance. I'd just also add, to me, there's a very important point in terms of also being the sort of eyes and ears out there within particular geographies. I was over in Kent yesterday, understanding what's happening there within their health system. And I think to be able to have that relationship with governors, so governors are able to also help support us, certainly in terms of being able to obviously hold us as non-execs to account, but also to add to that governance piece in terms of connecting and understanding what's happening locally. So it's just to also say thank you for the what you do in terms of getting involved, but also to say that value is very much felt by us and by me. So again, I'll just open it up. Are there any other questions or points in relation to governor development that colleagues would like to make? It seems not, Peter. So then, activities and queries report.
Thank you, my hat trick. Again, this is on behalf of Andrew. This lists the things that we've all been doing. I think it's actually quite impressive when you look at that, including observing the board committees when Neds quake in their boots when they see the governors turning up to observe them. But I think you'll find if you see the feedback, it's a very positive and I hope helpful process that we engage in there. So there, the report is there. Happy to take questions.
We seem quiet this morning, I have to say. I think, Peter, obviously they're just such solid reports that everyone is feeling very assured on all counts. Just to say that on that one, that there is an online form to report governor activity, just to be able to help the process. So just wanted to make a reminder of that. But if not, those are your three areas, then Peter, and thank you very much again for all your work on that. It then moves on. Next item is the annual report and accounts, as well as the audit opinion. And just to say, just have been made aware, this is Harvey, of inaccuracies in the reports and the accounts. It's unfortunate in terms of just that. We'll have to think about how we can get that timing, because it's very helpful to have that scrutiny, and we do like every single I to be dotted and T to be crossed. It's just I've been made aware we had discussions about what we were able to do about it, and unfortunately we're not able to do anything further, but we note it, and thank you very much for having done it. We'll just have to look as we go forward to make sure that loop, because it must be frustrating for you to be able to say I spotted something, but now you're not actually able to respond to it. But this is for information and in terms of further comment on it.
The annual report and accounts?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have Jessica here from KPMG.
We do. Up in the top, we have Jessica. Welcome, Jessica. I will hand over to you. And I think, Jessica, does everyone know you? If not, it might be worth just give us a little. Jessica and I work together because I have other non-executive roles, and KPMG also support on those. So I see her in various different settings, always providing fantastic support and advice. So if you want to just do a little bit of an introduction and then do your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. So good morning, I'm Jessica Hargreaves. I'm a director at KPMG and I'm the engagement leader for CCAM, and I sign off the audit opinion on behalf of KPMG. Just going to do a brief presentation today to talk you through the results of our external audit, which has resulted in the final annual report and accounts that you've been presented with. So just briefly, I'll just cover what are the responsibilities of your external auditors and what does our audit opinion cover. I'll then talk you through the results of our financial statements audit, the results of our value for money audit, and then happy to answer any questions that anyone has for me. In terms of our responsibilities as your external auditor, our work covers 4 key domains. There's first of all your financial statements. So our work here involves ensuring that the financial statements provide a true and fair view of the performance. We apply a materiality threshold to our audit work, and that materiality threshold is set to ensure that there are no significant differences with regards to the interpretation of the accounts. Our work here concludes with the audit opinion that you see within the financial statements. The second area of our work is the annual report. Our work here is less in-depth and less detailed with regards to the financial than it is compared to the financial statements. But what we do is ensure that the information presented in the annual report is consistent with both our knowledge of the trust and consistent with the information that's presented in the financial statements and what the numbers are telling us. There are certain disclosures with the annual report which we do audit, and we audit those to what we call a zero materiality, so we ensure that they are 100% accurate. And those disclosures are highlighted in the annual report as being audited and are specifically around the director's remuneration. The third area we cover is around the whole of government accounts. So CCAM's financial statements get consolidated into NHS England and ultimately the Department of Health's financial statements. So what we do is some work to confirm to the auditors of those other bodies that the financial statements of CCAM are accurate and appropriate to be consolidated into their financial statements. And the fourth area is in relation to value for money. So our work here is around assessing that the trust has adequate arrangements in place to ensure it's achieving value for money. Our work here is set by the National Audit Office, which dictates what we have to consider. And there are 3 domains which we consider within our work, which is around financial sustainability, governance, and then what we call the 3 E's, which is efficiency, effectiveness, and economies. So those are the 4 areas that our work focuses on. The value for money work actually concludes with a separate report called the Auditor's Annual Report, and that is a publicly available document that gets published alongside the annual reports on the Trust's website. So in terms of our audit for the 23-24 year end, what did we find? So we issued an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. This means it was a clean opinion, and we believe the financial statements to be true and fair. Our audit procedures did identify some adjustments, and we did identify 9 adjustments which the trust chose not to adjust for. Now, this is allowed under auditing standards, but we bring them to the attention of the reader of the financial statements. Now, if the trust had adjusted for those items that we identified, their expenditure figure would have been £3.7 million lower, so it would have resulted in an improved financial position to the one that's stated in the accounts by £3.7 million. Our audit did raise 11 control recommendations, which is higher than we generally see through NHS audits, but we are working closely with the trust to ensure that those recommendations are implemented and to ensure better financial controls in the future. But I would flag that whilst there were 11 recommendations, none of them were considered to be red or high-rated recommendations. They were all improvement observations. In terms of our annual report, we did issue an unmodified opinion on the annual report. And there were some adjustments made to the disclosures in the director's remuneration report as a result of our work. Our financial statements audit considered 3 significant risk areas, as well as all of the balances within the financial statements. These are the 3 areas that we paid particular focus and attention to. The first was in regards to the valuation of the land and buildings. This is by far the biggest number on the Trust's balance sheet, and it is an area of significant estimate and judgment. So CCAM's land and buildings are all considered to be non-specialised assets. So what this means that if they were vacated, another third-party organisation could use the buildings for a fairly similar purpose. The assets are valued based on an estimated rental value, and in order to do that, there are a number of assumptions that are made. Now, the Trust engages an external third party to assist it in valuing those assets, and we place a lot of reliance and work with that third party to understand their approach to make sure that it's the value they've determined is reasonable. During the financial year, the Trust did complete its construction of the Medway Make Ready Centre, and that did result in a significant impairment on the Trust's balance sheet and financial statements in the year. Now, that's not unusual, as often the cost of building an asset is higher than the fair value if you went on to sell it. And it is quite common that we see when a Trust completes the building of an asset, completes the building work, there will be an impairment on that value. And that did result in £15 million of expenditure on the Trust's financial statements in the year. The second significant area for our work is in relation to expenditure recognition. So this is an area where auditing standards within the public sector expect us to have a fraudulent expenditure recognition risk. That's because of the incentives to perhaps manipulate the expenditure figure to achieve a desired position. So we recognise that as a risk for our audit, and we undertake specific procedures to ensure that we are happy with the accuracy of those expenditure figures. We did identify some differences in our work here, and as I said, if those differences had been corrected by the Trust, it would have resulted in an improved or a reduced expenditure position, but we're happy that the financial statements are materially accurate. The third area of our audit is around management override of controls. This is a significant risk area that we identify on every external audit that we undertake, regardless of the sector. And our work here is focused around the entries that the Trust posts within its financial ledger to ensure that they're accurate and supported by documentation and irrelevant transactions. I'll move on then to the results of our value for money audit. So as part of our planning procedures, we did identify a significant risk for our value for money audit. This was in relation to the governance domain for the Trust, and driven in part by the CQC's inadequate rating back from 2022, but also driven by a lot of the changes that happened at the Trust during the financial year in respect to the governance domain. What we did identify was significant improvements have been made to the Trust, and a lot of attention has been paid in relation to the governance and strengthening the controls in place. We did, however, conclude that we still felt there was a significant weakness in the Trust's arrangements within this domain. And that's consistent with our findings for the last couple of years. So whilst we noted improvements have been made, there was still some work to do at the end of the financial year. And the weakness was largely driven by the volume of reports that the Trust had received in the year, which did identify weaknesses and improvement areas. And we felt that there was a common theme identified within these reports, that findings had already been identified and issued but hadn't been flagged within the Trust's risk management processes. Now, we know the Trust has been working on those processes throughout the 23-24 financial year, and we expect to see an improvement in those areas for 24-25. So those are the results of our 23-24 external audit, and happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I think you provided a really, really clear oversight. And I will again say thank you so much for the very supportive way in which KPMG works with the trust. It very much, you know, you're there very much as that critical friend. And as you can see, you know, the unqualified nature of the report is very important for us to hear, but also to be able to hear those areas where we need to focus and where we need to continue to improve. I will open it up to be able to see if there are questions. I've got one, Martin, in the first instance.
Sorry, can I just seek for clarification? The 3.7 million that sorry, the unadjusted misstatements would have increased the reported end-year position by 3.7 million. And then you mentioned about the value of the land and buildings, and I think a £15 million figure was mentioned. Can I just clarify? Are we saying that that actually the trust is net in a 3.7 million better position than we thought it was? And is that, like, how shall I put it, book figures in terms of the accounts, the valuation of assets, or is it real cash?
So the £15 million figure I mentioned in relation to the land and buildings, that is included within the numbers that are in the accounts. It's included within the operating expenses figure. That is an accounting adjustment. That is a non-cash number. The £3.7 million figure I referred to, so those were accruals made by the trust at the end of the financial year. So they were items that the trust had said was expenditure for this financial year, but our audit procedures deemed that they were expenditure for future financial years, or were in fact prudent. So the trust thought they would be spending more than they actually would have been. So those are, in theory, cash transactions, but they're not cash that had been paid in the year. And they're not included in the numbers.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to say thank you to Jessica, first of all, for coming to present to the Council of Governors. We really appreciate that. Chair, I've got a question, not for Jessica, but about what she reported. May I ask that?
Please, Peter, yeah.
Yeah, so it's obviously on the value for money concern. I just wanted some feedback from the NEDs about whether you're assured that things are being done properly and quickly enough.
Michael, I think probably most appropriate.
Yeah. My name is Michael Whitehouse. I chair the audit committee, and I'm an auditor by background, and I formerly worked at the National Audit Office, where I had lead responsibility for the assessments that we did on central government departments as well as local government in terms of value for money. So I really support Jessica's assessment. In answer to your question, Peter, yes, I am assured. I think the last year was quite turbulent, but what I saw the last year is a year where we were putting in place the fundamental principles of an organisation that is much more resilient and can better demonstrate that it is using public money appropriately. What I'm really encouraged by is the work that Simon, our Director of Finance, is doing, which is around the control environment. I think in the past within CCAM there have been too many areas of single point of failure. You know, you've had expertise in individuals who then leave the organisation, and we haven't got the underlying systems and processes in place. That is being addressed by our Director of Finance, and I give that as one example, and that's been very carefully tracked by Howard in the Finance Investment Committee and myself as Chair of the Audit Committee. We have an Audit Committee next week where we are going to be looking at this to assess progress. So I am very much encouraged. I also think a few minutes is ultimately one of the key drivers of strong value for money in most organisations is strong leadership that clearly understands what it is there to do, has the appropriate governance supporting it, and is there to challenge. And I think what you are now seeing, in my view, and I've been around for 6 years at CCAM, is an executive team that is acting as an executive team should be. My colleagues in quality, patient quality, Liz and Subu for people, there is more to be done. And I think there is certainly more to be done in culture, and there's more to be done in our HR functions and support. But I think the trajectory is positive.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Peter. It's a very, very helpful question to have. I'm going to hand over to Simon as well to comment.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. I absolutely accept and just want to add my thanks to Jessica for the work in KPMG's reports. I'll make two comments. I think Jessica's already alluded to some of the work that the Trust has done in year, which we will reflect in next year's report, not this year's. So obviously, as part of our RSP process, we had a secondary well-led review, given the fact the CQC have not been out with us since 2022, that identified significant improvements in the control environment, particularly in respect of risk and quality oversight. There is more work to do in those areas, but I think we acknowledge, that, but the improvement since 2022, which is a reflection of many people's effort across the organisation, I think is underway. The other point I wanted to make was around productivity in its widest sense. There is no nationally accepted definition, interestingly, about what constitutes a productive ambulance service. We're about to engage in some work on that, which I look forward to debating in various different forums. But simply put, if you take the amount of money that we get as income at the very top of the hopper, and then at the bottom of the funnel, you consider how many patient-facing hours we are able to put on the road, that is something that has challenged the ambulance sector to agree a common set of definitions around. But clearly now, given the financial environment which we are faced with, both locally and nationally, is something that we absolutely have to attend to. So the Trust is engaged in a number of pieces of work on that as part of our collaboration with our Southern Ambulance collaboration. We are hoping to bring forward a piece of work later on this year to address that, and we internally are also looking at that, because I would invite us to consider that's the key question. If you look at the top line of income and then the number of patient-facing hours, how can we be assured that we're making the best use of that money to put the most patient hours on the road, or in an ops centre, or on our 111, anything of those sort of services? And we need to challenge ourselves to get better at that conversation. I am clear that we do not have a language for that at the moment, either internally within the organisation or more generally across the sector, but I think that is a key piece of work for us going forward, and I look forward in due course to being able to update you on that.
Thanks, Simon. Are there other questions and equally just comments in relation to Jessica's report, but more generally the audit function at the Trust? If not, thank you again, Peter, for that question, because that really helped us to sort of open things up. And I'd certainly concur, as I've already said, that I work with Jessica in a number of organisations. I can also see the progress. I can see that there is a challenge here, for sure. But I can also see the progress that's been made. And I think as that question, as non-executives, if we're assured, I think we're assured at the progress, where we have confidence in the executive in terms of being able to, I think, lead us to further improvement over the next period, even though we recognise it's going to be a challenging year. It'll be a challenging winter and a challenging year, but they very much seem to be over this. So I think that's helpful to hear.
Chairman, I wonder if we might sort of schedule a report back at subsequent COGs about how this particular issue is going, so we can see it disappearing as a concern.
Good suggestion, Peter. Let's do that. And Peter will note that for future. We can come back to that at future meetings. Excellent. If we have finished there, then can I thank you once again for travel. I know you travel all around the place, but it's and also that, you know, it could have been very easy for you to have joined online, but to travel down and come in person, I think is really helpful for us. So thank you so much for doing that, Jessica. We then move on to the section performance and holding to account, and we're going to start. Just to say we're running well on time, and we're going to start with an update from Simon as Chief Executive.
Thank you, Usman. So, 3 or 4 things to talk about. I'll attend first to, I think it would be remiss of me not to comment on the Darzi review, given the fact that we sit in the shadow of that being published this week. Then I'll cover year to date and where we are, and a bit of an outlook for the rest of the year. And then finally, I'll attend to some regulatory issues that we face as we move into the second half of the year, particularly on RSP. So the Darzi report was published this week, and I'm sure some of you may have had a chance to read it or various summaries of it. I think my view of it is I welcome it, and I welcome the candour and rigour of the Mirror that has been held up, and I also welcome the general direction of travel that points to the solution space. Darzi identifies, I think, 3 key shifts that need to take place. The first is a left shift, by which we mean moving more activity from hospital into communities. The second is an investment in digital and making the NHS much more technologically enabled. And the third, I think, is the need to address some of the capital imbalances that sit behind the NHS buildings. We are fortunate in CCAM to have a good quality estate compared to many of our colleagues, but I think in welcoming the strategy, I think the point welcoming Darzi's report, I think I want to say it particularly chimes with the strategy that we have published earlier on this summer, which clearly is designed at its heart to make sure fewer people get conveyed to hospital in an appropriately clinically managed way, and that we accelerate our investment and our support of the digital transformation that we know will be at the heart of providing care for the future. We are now into the stage, and we're part, as many of our partners are, of conversations about what do the next 10 years bring. So, as some of you may know, Wes Streeting has commissioned Sally Warren, ex of the King's Fund, and other alumni, to come together and prepare a plan for the next 10 years of the NHS that is resonant with the themes that I have just described. We will be part of that process of considering what is important, the first such opportunity comes in October, when the regional team of which we are a part will meet with their national team to convey a sense of what we think are the priorities for us and also for more generally the region. It's clear, though, that the environment in the short term will remain really challenging. We've had a couple of opportunities now to hear from the Secretary of State, and I'm sure you've also seen and heard some of his comments. There will be no more money this year, and so we continue to have to manage in a very challenged environment, despite the fact that our demand, the calls on our services, are increasing above the level at which we planned for them. And that, in the second half of the year, may come back to create further challenges. In other words, commissioners agreed with us or proposed to us that they would be able to limit the activity rises to under 3%. Currently, our activity is growing at about 7%. So you can see the pressure that in every day is affecting us. So it will be essential, going back to that point around left shift, moving more activity into the community, preventing it from escalating through the care system, that everybody is successful in that. So where are we year to date? We are on plan financially at month 5. That is a signal achievement because many of our colleagues around us are not on plan. So I commend the work that Simon and his team have done to create the environment in which we are balancing on plan, because I'm also able to report that we are below the required trajectory, in other words, ahead of where we need to be to hit the C2 mean target for the end of this year. So our core deliverables of hitting our control total, delivering for our patients, we are in a solid position at this point in the year. And again, when I do the comparison, not all ambulance services are able to be in that position. So it is something we should be rightly proud of. And as ever, when I get an opportunity to do so, it's really important I say thank you to clinical colleagues in the room for all the work that they do every day to maintain that. It's a really impressive achievement. And no matter some of the regulatory challenges that we may have had, one that we should again be justly proud of is the fact that our quality of care remains high. We've never had that regulatory interjection in terms of quality challenges, and it's something again that the organisation has been and should be rightly proud of. So on year to date, all good. What do we think is going to happen over winter? Well, we're gearing up now for winter. I think it would be fair to say that all the indicators are that that will be a significant challenge for us. It's going to be a significant challenge for everybody, because if I look, we're clearly nested in a complex ecosystem of other healthcare and social care providers. All of them, bar none, are under significant strain. So we are working very well with all of our partners. I think one of the things that I am very pleased to be able to report is our nested relationships in each of our ICBs are strong. Usman and I spend quite a lot of our time out and about promoting and supporting those relationships, and the feedback that we get is that that is going well. That is not going to make winter any easier, but it might make some of the conversations that we need to have that little bit more based on relationships. Inevitably, during the second half of the year, we see performance come under more challenge. Demand generally tends to rise in half 2. We meet at the kind of turn of the year as we head into half 2. And so I see that challenge coming down the road towards us. My biggest worries would be if activity continues to rise, because although we are on plan financially, there would come a point where if activity rose further, we would face a starker choice about, do we continue to adhere to our control total, or do we put more hours on the road to meet the demand that may come? We're not there yet, but it is a clear risk that's in our environment. And that risk is because we've made significant savings this year as part of our SIP programme, including, for example, taking out all of our private ambulance provision, which was very expensive, but nonetheless NHS England challenged all providers to take out agency costs. That's our equivalent of agency. And so we are reliant now on our own ability to steer that course. So a real risk. The region is gearing up to hold a series of winter events. We will clearly be a part of those through each of the systems that we work with. I would say there is not a system in which we work where there are not significant pressures in the acute sector, or indeed in the social care sector. And our plan to continue to roll out our hubs to mitigate demand is critical, I think, both to our success but also to the success of our acute partners. We've now got good data to demonstrate that putting those hubs in place, the interface between the call and convey moment, does make a material difference to what you are able to take to hospitals. We are working with our commissioners to see how far we can roll those out over the rest of the year. The rate limiting ability of us to do that will not be the capital, it will be, do we have the revenue support from our commissioners to help us put the staff in place to run those hubs. So it's a great concept bought into by everybody, and over the next, imminently in the next few weeks, I expect to have those discussions with commissioners. Finally, turning to the regulatory environment. So as people know, we continue to be part of the Regional Support Programme, formerly known as Special Measures, for those who are unfamiliar with that term. The previous iteration of the RSP programme that we were in up until May has seen most of the undertakings that we had previously removed. That reflects the improvements that were made in terms of board oversight and governance, the improvement in the management of risk, and the improvements that people have seen in terms of connectivity to staff in the front line. There are two principal challenges that remain, and these now are the subject of the current focus of the RSP environment. The first, not surprisingly, is money. We've already alluded to that. The question here that we are grappling with is how do we get to a sustainable position? So CCAM has two challenges, as do all NHS organisations, and Jessica alluded to it. One is to deliver the great quality services for patients. The other is simultaneously to live within a financial environment where for the last 2 years we've had no uplift in our within our revenue budgets, and that's a tension, isn't it? And so not only is that a tension in year, we know, because we've done the work with our strategy, that demand will continue to rise quite rapidly over the forthcoming number of years. Remind you all of the core stat. In terms of calls, a city the size of Worthing, or a town the size of Worthing, will be happening to us over the next 4 or 5 years. 110,000 calls additionally per annum if we do nothing. So we need a longer term financial plan, and our effort is with our commissioners is to agree a framework in which we can plan for the longer term. One part of that is our strategy, but the second is to make some agreement about principles that commissioners will adopt so that we can make the investments in services, the transitions that we need to make. The other will be the focus of our HR improvement plan. It will be coming to board in October for sign-off. We had a good board development session last week where we looked at the first cut of the plan. It has just been through regional scrutiny this week, just before, just in the last couple of days, and it will be going through further levels of scrutiny before it comes to board. I want to signal the fact that this plan is going to be really quite far-reaching. It's at least a 2-year fix that I am talking about, and it's going to require a whole organisational effort to achieve it. I think you will have the opportunity at a future meeting, no doubt, to scrutinise and be involved in talking about the delivery of the plan, so I won't do too much here other than to say it's probably one of my 2 or 3 top priorities to get behind and support. I think the metaphor that I discussed with Usman is that we need to create some space to bring that function into dry dock and really kind of rebuild it pretty much from the ground upwards. That is not to say there are not good people trying to do their best, but I want to say here, I think, that under the leadership of Sarah, we now need to get behind the second stage of bringing the leader in, which is to do the root and branch changes that I think are required to get us into a place that we need to be. So we'll be back in board talking about that in October and then no doubt reporting it here. Those lead us to a place where in December I would expect us to be suggesting that, subject to making progress on those 2 matters in particular, we would be recommending to the regional and national teams that we were ready to come out of RSP. We've had our time in it, and we need to assert for ourselves that we are ready to move forward on that. That, for me, is a sign of the organisation. It shouldn't be being ready to go. It shouldn't be something somebody else tells us to do. It should be something we are saying we are confident that we are now ready to sail our own ship, rather than somebody saying, go here, go there. And I am confident that that's the direction that we are now heading in. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simon, and a really comprehensive overview of both that external environment and also internal. So I think, you know, the summary of it is a lot of moving parts, but very much in terms of within a positive framing. Let me open up and see if there are again questions and comments. I'm going to take Stephen first.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, if I may, which I may need to come back and ask in an operational setting rather than as an appointed governor, but because of what you said, it's prompted me to ask now. So the first one, I understand we pretty much have an assumption of conveyance when a healthcare provider requests an ambulance. I suspect, but I haven't really analysed the data properly, that a number of our patients arriving RED that our consultants don't think need to be conveyed are the ones coming from healthcare providers. So if we are going to follow DARS's recommendations of shifting left, are we going to be in a position where we can start challenging healthcare provider requests for conveyance?
You'll forgive me if I take the provocative out of or challenge healthcare providers' requests. I think one of the things that we need to do is to create different offerings that give people confidence that they have a reasonable alternative to requesting an ambulance, is the way I would perhaps phrase the answer to your question. I think, you know, in today's climate, there is a lot of risk aversion, and the default option for many people, be it in a nursing home, be it in a GP surgery, be it at home sometimes, is to feel that the only option that you have is to call an ambulance. And I think one of the biggest things that we have to do in delivering the strategy is build confidence in each of our ICBs that there are other, and indeed, may I say, better alternatives than calling an ambulance. Now, we've made the first steps on it. I alluded to Kent, where the hubs have been delivered, and it has helped a number of people feel more confident in the alternatives. It's also revealed that there aren't enough of those alternatives, and there aren't enough of them operating 7 days a week for sufficient hours during the day that we can really ramp up that offering. But that's the core of our strategy. So we have to make people an offer, I think, that they can believe in, and then I think we can challenge. And we also have to work out what we need to do differently as well in that, because the change has to also start with us. When we did the analysis for our strategy, we noticed that, of all the calls that we go to, only about 700 or 1,000, only 13% of them really fit into that critically urgent, do not pass go, send an ambulance straight away. So there is considerable opportunity for us all to do something different. What I am pleased to say is that our partners are absolutely up for that debate. And in fact, our next assurance meeting, which is next week, the focus of that is that we're going to show them where their activity has gone up, their demand coming into us, and talk to them about what are the things that you could do, not what we could do before winter, to help mitigate that demand. So that conversation is absolutely live, and I would encourage us, so thank you for the question, to keep coming back to it in the months and years ahead, because the extent to which we can bend that demand curve is the extent to which we will eventually impact what goes to emergency departments right around the place. But thanks for the question.
I'm going to go to Ray next, and then I'll go up to Martin.
Can I just pick up on the question of hubs and pathways? In the next quarter, the plan is to roll out in a staggered fashion 5 new hubs, and I just get the feeling that perhaps that's not quite going to happen. If it hasn't, are we in a position to manage the risks, which I guess would include a financial risk in the longer term? And can I just add about pathways, because it seems to be hubs will depend on pathways, and are we assured that the pathway programme is on target, in particular the commitment to all the players who have to implement the pathways?
Both really good questions, Ray. So the hubs are integrally related to staffing the hubs. So as I said in my comments, we've got places that we can put people, but the cost is bringing the people together into the right rooms to have the conversations. That's where the magic happens. It really only works when you've got the right clinicians from across the system in a room together having, we could do this differently, we could do that differently conversation. And we're still waiting to hear whether the money that we need in order to do that will be available. And that's where you get, as you correctly alluded to, into the kind of doctrine of hard choices. If we funded that on our own, we would breach our control total, which is why we're seeking additional funding for it. Now that's a choice we could make, it's a choice we may be allowed to make, but it's the debate we're now engaged in. On the position around pathways completely, the clinicians in the room have to manage to an agreed set of pathways. Our clinicians, our medical director, our nursing director, and our soon-to-be chief paramedic will be key in, we've not been waiting for those conversations to happen, so we're developing pathways all the time. I would say at the moment, it looks very different depending on where you are in our system. So Kent does not do the same as Surrey, does not do the same as Sussex, does not do the same as Frimley. They all have different service offerings. And one of the things that I think strategically we need to have a conversation with our providers, our provider colleagues, is how do you standardise more of those pathways across the region? And what are the key ones to standardise? If I was looking at that, I would say offerings around frailty and a frailty pathway I think are key. Within that, how we standardise care responses to nursing home call-outs. Within that, how are we going to ask others to come alongside us to help us with some of our Cat 3, Cat 4 workfalls, and that. All of those are rich opportunities for us to do more and do different. Which is why this work that we do when we go around to meet with people is because up until now, and I think the Darcy report reports on this is he made an explicit comment, didn't he? A&Es are in a dreadful state. 10, 20 years ago, there were 10 people now. I can't remember the precise numbers. Now there are 100 people in front of you in the queue. I think that was the number. Why is that? Well, more people are going to A&E as the default for their first point of care than ever before. And it is our collective need, not just in the ambulance sector, but our collective need to try and start pulling that number back down. To do that, the left shift that I referred to is not just around moving activity, it's about moving money. The other thing that Darcy said was, over the last X number of years, basically we've spent more money on hospitals, and now we need to be serious about spending more money in the community. So this is, you're raising questions that are at the heart of the dilemma that has affected the NHS, to which the kind of diagnosis is clear, but what has been really tricky is making that transition, because I would end by observing that successive governments have made exactly the same point. The only way forward is to put more money into communities, and successive governments, for whatever reason, have not managed to deliver that. So I can't give you an easy answer there, really, Ray. Sorry about that, but your questions are good ones, and we need to keep our eyes on them going forward.
Thank you. Just one. What order of magnitude of money are we seeking? Can you give us an idea?
2 million this year.
Martin.
Yes, that is it. Thank you. I've got what you might call a straightforward question, a question of clarification and an observation, if I may. On the straightforward question, it's about the increase in demand running at 7% rather than 3%. Has there been any kind of analysis that says where that demand is coming from? I mean, in terms of conditions, demographics and geography, because that's actually quite important to understand. So that's the first sort of straightforward question. The clarification one was, you talked about winter and you said that the biggest concern was if demand continues to rise. Does that mean rise above 7% or maintain at the 7% level? So that's the clarification. And the third one is to do with the longer term, which is the elephant in the room, which is to do with house building. The leader of Milton Keynes Council has said that he can build more houses. You've got to have a new hospital to do it. Now, obviously, that's in the context of what you're saying around Darcy, but of course, primary care is infrastructure too, as is sewers and everything else. And just sort of, how shall I put it, being slightly cynical about the way politics works and the political time frame, infrastructure doesn't materialise quite as quickly as houses might. And one of the things the government's going to be deciding on fairly soon, apparently, is the location of new towns. So there is that whole thing about house building and new towns, and the pressure points around London are one of the biggest pressure points. That is a scenario planning type role that has to be factored in somewhere if it hasn't already. Sorry to be long-winded, but I thought I'd pick the three things off.
No, again, really good questions. So on the last one first, the 10-year plan, they have made an explicit commitment that it needs to be nested in a wider plan for government. In other words, there's no point in having a 10-year plan if it doesn't respect the realities on the ground. And explicitly within that, the promise to us as health service leaders was, there are some things that we would like you to do, but there are some things that we recognise that we in government need to do in order to make sense of the environment in which you're providing those healthcare services within. So the extent to which that will be successful, we will see over the coming months. I think the current plan date for the publication of the 10-year plan is in the first half of next year. And we need to scrutinise that plan when it comes out to see if it makes sense in the context of the other challenges, the other policy initiatives that the government intend to deliver on. And I think it's absolutely incumbent upon you as governors to continue to have that duality of conversation. It's not just about what we do and how we do it. It's also about what is going on around us. I would say my lived experience over the last 10 years has been that houses have grown faster than health services. And if that continues in that vein, that would be a real challenge for us, because it would accelerate even further the demand that I'm talking about. On your second point, the answer is straightforward. It would be demand rising above 7% as we head into winter. The demand is consistent at above plan. If it carries on above plan, the point I was making was we will end in a place where we will potentially risk breaching our control total on the one hand, or having to put more hours on the road in the other. And I've already raised and flagged that risk with commissioners, that I can see if we do not manage to get control over it, we will struggle. Which leads me to your first point. The answer to that is yes. That demand analysis has been done, and indeed the primary subject of our next regional assurance meeting, which is next week, is not really for us to talk about ourselves. You know, we've talked about ourselves to death, but in actual fact to say is to present that analysis to our ICB partners and to say, look, here is where the demand is happening, because it's different, it's not uniform. What can you do? And if you can't do something, at least we're clear that you can't, and then let's have a conversation about what that means for us.
Yes.
And I would be very happy, once we've presented that analysis there, for it to be shared to this group and others, and to do the same presentation about what the demand profile is looking like, so that you all can see it, because this is a subject that should concern us all, because if we are unable to turn off the tap, or rather divert the tap into alternative destinations,
Yes.
inevitably there comes a point at which the crunch would occur, you know, a choice between the money and the delivery.
Yeah.
So again, thank you, all good questions.
Yes, because there's the issue. Sorry, because of course it's also talking about C2. It's one thing to talk about C2 again across Kent, Surrey and Sussex. It's very different to talk about C2 in Brighton versus Worthing versus Dorking versus Woking. You know, so that's a piece of information that I'm completely blind to.
Well, perhaps then, what I'll make an offer here then. If once we've done the analysis, if governors would like a kind of special seminar where we just take you through some of that stuff, I'm very happy to organise that. I will leave that with you to reflect on amongst yourselves. But if people would like to go through that presentation that we give, it may help you as you think about what we need to do.
Thanks, Martin. I'm going to go over to Kirsty now.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for that. Mine is in two parts. It's for you, and it's obviously for Subo and for Liz from a thing. So my question's relating to the hubs. I know the hubs, obviously, we've had the Ashford pilot, but I'd just like to seek some assurance that the evaluation criteria for the next set of hubs is clear. Even though they're not pilots, we should evaluate them so that we can learn to improve what that's going to look like going forward, because they're not just a set-in-stone model. And so that was mine. I'd just like to seek some assurance that the evaluation criteria is going to be clear and we will learn. And then my other is, both for Subo and for Liz, can I just seek some assurance that the staff that work in the hubs, that we ensure that they feel safe both clinically to work in the hubs, they have the right tools, but also to that they then feel safe working clinically on the front line. I'd just like to seek some assurance that both the People Committee and the Quality and Patient Safety Committee just keep an eye on that, please.
So I'll open out both of them and then others can comment. The homework has been marked, and it demonstrates that there is a positive impact. That's from Kent, and we're using that as the kind of basis of the discussion for the rest of the year. Clearly, each area, as I've already said, each ICB that we serve is different. So we will need to, whilst transferring all the evaluation criteria that we can in common, we'll have to respect and understand those differences before we get in there. But there is a robust, in fact, Kent have done a robust analysis of how has this worked and what has worked. And indeed, I think the board also saw Nick and team come earlier on this year and report on the same thing, which is that there is no doubt that this made a difference in a number of different ways. So if colleagues would like to see that analysis, you're very welcome to. It was presented to the board earlier on this year. I would also say, in support of these hubs, this is absolutely the heart of national policy. So this is not only an expectation from ourselves, it's also an expectation from others. And finally, I would say, at the moment, as an ambulance service, we are in the lead of this. You know, we are ahead of the curve, and one of the things I'm trying to make sure is that we are ahead of the curve. I think going back to the second part of your question, do people feel safe? Well, whenever you try anything new, there is the turbulence of change. But I think if you'd have been at the presentation Nick did at the board earlier on, Nick and his team, you would have felt the clinical buy-in for this. Because not only does it give people more support at scene, it also had a number of other ancillary benefits, one of which I will highlight here, which was something that we don't often talk about and we should talk about more, our Category 1 performance. Because we were defraying more work into different channels, it meant that we had more capability to be faster responding to some of the Category 1 calls. But it's an ongoing debate. You know, this is not a kind of one and done moment. This is something that we will have to continue to check and challenge on an ongoing basis, because the notion that evaluation is a fixed point in time, yes it is, but as demand changes, as the call profile changes, we will need to change what we do and continue to evaluate that. So I would say all of these things we need to constantly be reflecting on. But I think from my view, clinicians are really supportive of this. And because this was built from the ground upwards, clinicians owning it, it encouraged that safety that you referred to.
Yes.
I think from a safety perspective for our team, I think there's been that added MDT team in place with consultants at times who are also doing that navigation of our patients. I think a more important area is are our patients safe? If we don't convey to hospital, how do we follow up that there are alternative pathways, whether that's community, GP, follow up with adult social care, whether that follows through. And we've actually been doing a pilot for Tangmere around unsafe discharge and actually following up on our patients around that. I think our clinicians felt really supported by the wider MDT, but I think there are lessons to learn from the evaluation and how we move forward, and the demand from local ICBs and local acute trusts in terms of how we manage that. But it's a very exciting opportunity for our clinicians in terms of that decision making. And there is still as our clinical cascade that we have in place up the line if our clinicians have any concerns.
Thanks so much, Liz. Martin, you want to come back?
Can I just ask clarification from Simon? Are the hubs going to be a national policy, or is this something which CCAM is doing, which they've looked at and liked? I mean, is it something which actually the government is going to sort of start saying, thou shalt do, and here's some money to do it?
It is national policy set by NHS England to defray as much activity away from hospitals as possible. And so they're called a variety of different things: single points of access, hubs. The model that we have provided has been visited by the national team and was absolutely commended. Indeed, I received a kind of very positive reflections from the national team about the work that we had done, and to reflect also that we've been shortlisted in that category for an HSJ award at the main HSJ award later on this year. So it's absolutely at the heart of everybody's thinking. The difficulties are the ones that I've alluded to. You know, you have to release the money from here and reinvest it here, and that's that's a real challenge at the moment. But that's the conversation that's absolutely live at this moment in time about how do we square that circle.
Thank you. I'm just looking around. I think that's given a very good airing, and Simon gave a very good overview. I'll just add just a couple of comments just from a chair perspective. As Simon alluded to, the two of us do quite a lot of on the road as a double act. It is interesting across our 4 ICBs. I'd probably say it's reasonable to say I certainly feel I'm probably spending a good amount of time in Sussex. There's a lot of work that's being done, a lot of system work that's being done that necessarily involves us, but also in terms of Sussex wanting to engage, they do engage very well with us. And I feel that there's a need to be able to balance across the 4 health systems. I was actually over in Kent yesterday with Sedi Frederick as the chair and all of the chairs of the trust. That also sort of led to another point where I can compare, say, Kent, where they have a pretty sophisticated understanding of the CCAM offer. I mean, obviously they should do, because they do, as Simon had said, have the hubs in various forms. Obviously, some are more developed than others, but they understand the hub model and they can understand the benefits of it. And I think they're also understanding, as Liz had said, that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and they're looking to be able to sort of get levels of design for them at the local level. But then when I talked to my chair colleague at the ICB in Frimley, he generally said, in a very positive and open way, but said he really sees ambulance services in terms of the challenge elements of it, in terms of maintaining C2 numbers and also in terms of handover, and have not seen us as fully as being a system partner and a system enabler. So I think there's that work is still there to be done, and that probably also is there for Surrey, and it may seem odd because Surrey is actually our commissioner, but it does actually apply to Surrey. So I think, and that also, I'd go back to the ideas of governors being eyes and ears and voice out there. So to be able to support us in being able to ensure that across our 4 health systems, there is that basic understanding that we're here to be a system enabler and a system partner. And yes, hubs is a central part of that, but there is also more to the story than that. But to recognise that we have to work at the pace that we can work at. And as Simon has said, we have had to put forward a budget that is reduced from what we would optimally have had, which would have allowed us to move at a faster pace on hubs. So we will need to work with our partners very closely in order to do that. So that's giving a sense of what we are doing to be able to sort of level up and make sure that all our ICBs across CCAM are working in the same way and to the same sort of song sheet. I'm now going to do a pause. I know you've had a pre-meeting, and we've had pre-meetings as well. So I suggest we just take a short break, and if we start again at a couple of minutes to, but 11 o'clock on the dot. We need to be finished for 12, and we're going to come back, and then we'll be hearing from Liz, Subu, and Michael to be able to talk around these 3 themes. So let's take a comfort break. I believe there should be coffee up at the top. So we'll reconvene at 11. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for helpfully coming back in good time. Hopefully, yes, feeling a little bit refreshed. So we're now going to go through, as I say, this is the new system that we have. We have the three themes: delivering high quality patient care, our people enjoy working at CCAM, and we're a sustainable partner. And we ran this, I think it ran pretty well at the last meeting. So let's continue it with that in vein. And we're going to start off delivering high quality patient care. And that's over to you, Liz.
Areas of concern, I can hear an echo now. So, and happy to take any questions at the end. So yes, the focus here is we deliver high quality patient care. I think from a NED perspective, we have a reasonable level of assurance. I think some areas of recognition is around the quality improvement approach within this, and there are 3 QI objectives within the BAF as priorities, which is safety in the waiting list. And you'll note a change in terminology. We used to talk about patients in the stack in the EOC and in the call centres. We're now calling it a waiting list. It has a very different connotation than just patients sitting there in a stack, that they are actually there waiting. We are focusing on inter-facility transfers, EOC clinical audit process, and logistics, waste reduction, obviously an area of focus as well. And I think I just want to highlight from our QI team have been so active, and it was great to see them presenting to London Ambulance earlier this week on the CCAM approach and what London Ambulance can learn from the way we have embraced QI. So that was fantastic to see. I think one small change arising for our Q1 priority, which is about keeping our patients safe in the waiting list, is just a small change that meant an automated welfare text was sent to our patients. Hadn't been done previously, so after a period of time, our patients now receive a text just as a welfare to see how they are doing. And I think, you know, in the first week alone, over 9,000 texts were sent. From those texts, 454 patients cancelled their need for an ambulance. And amazing. But also 308 hours were saved in welfare calling, following up on that, and 22 hours saved in call handling, and 15 hours saved in duplicate calls. So I think the impact of one small digital innovation in 1 week was so impressive, and we will follow that up and get you further information on that. I think earlier Martin mentioned about C2 mean time. Fantastic achievement, we have achieved it. There were some challenges at times during the summer due to demand, but the overall 30-minute time was achieved. But there was NED challenge to the exec, and also focus on C3 and C4, which tend to be our elderly, frail, multiple condition patients, because current data is showing some decline in C3 in order for us to hit that C2 mean target. So there is ongoing focus on that. And also we mentioned earlier about evidence of that increased demand in the first quarter, which is unusual over the summer months to actually see that level of demand. So higher than that's assumed in the plan with our commissioners. And as Simon said earlier, ongoing discussions with system partners, and system action is needed on how we can manage this, because we are currently not funded for that level of demand increase. I think we talked about the unscheduled care navigation hubs. I think a concern for us is obviously work continues with our local providers to establish by October, November, and these we know will have a positive impact on our patients. but the risk is we still don't have the financial funding for those hubs. So as much as it's clear in our strategy, as much as we would like to do this and move forward and develop, it's October in a few weeks and we still don't have agreed funding. So I think there is a risk around how we can move that forward. I think clinical models of care and pathways was mentioned earlier, and we are ensuring more focus from the pathways on patient outcomes, and we will report to board the impact on that and the specific areas around our stroke patient outcomes and the area of health inequalities. And our exec have agreed that there is more work to do in those two areas, and it is in our BAF. Just another area of recognition, and I did mention it at the last Council of Governors, is around the research work undertaken for acute behavioural disturbance, and that has now been adopted across all ambulance trusts. So again, you know, great recognition for our team and the work that has been done in that area. The BAF report is there, progress is documented, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Liz. And in opening up, that was really helpful in terms of how you're framing it. Questions specifically on the report, but also just more broadly within the domain. You've done a little of that under Simon's presentation, but to open it up. Ray, you're going to kick us off.
Sorry, just another question about hubs. You'll get fed up with me talking about hubs. If the money was released in next week, is everything in position to put the hubs in place, or does this mean a lot of recruitment of people?
I probably should go with that
Oh,
one.
sorry,
Ray.
Simon.
No, it's fine. And do keep talking about hubs. We're all very interested in it, so it's absolutely fine. We are proceeding to do all the work that we can do. And I think there is a real appetite. I was having a conversation with Stephen in the break, I think in local communities to make it happen. So if the money is unlocked, I think we could proceed at pace. We can do so much enabling work. The enabling work we can do is the buildings, the IT, creating the space, you know, all that kind of stuff. But as I said earlier on, the magic happens when you put the right clinicians in the room together. And that's the thing that we now need to focus on. So if we got the money, could we roll out the 5? Well, I haven't road tested that completely, but I'm confident we could make pretty good progress.
And I think, Ray, from my perspective, the Darcy reports helped us with that, talking about neighbourhood care local to the population. So I think if there is an incentive around that, but I think the hubs are not just made up of CCAM staff. So our frailty consultants, etc., will be coming from community or acute trusts. So we do need that level of system partnership and buy-in.
Is that a look, Stephen? Was that on?
Sorry, I guess it is. I'm busy writing an email about this right now because it's just like on my mind. Because I remember being in system conversations with this over a year ago and they died. They started and they died, and they're not in the current winter plan discussions. I've got ED consultants who are crying out for something like this, but know that they don't have enough of them to put someone in the centre unless it's commissioned, you know, which is your problem too, isn't it? It's the staffing. And so I think we should have a conversation with our ICB around what we are doing with the winter money this winter and whether there's opportunities to prove and demonstrate things. But that would mean not doing something else, which sat in the winter plan last winter. But I do think there needs to be a conversation on this, because if we don't have people coming to the ED, so to give a picture of a day, for those who don't know, I'm the hospital director at Worthing. To give a picture of a day, we have patients conveyed late in the afternoon from care homes. They never come in the morning. They always come late. they then don't need to be admitted. They're staying in our department overnight. They're breached. They're filled the department up, and the next day we're trying to find transport to take them back to the care home they came from. If they're not there, the department's not so crowded, and we give better treatment for the patients that need to be there, and your ambulances don't get held. It really is this is something which would make a difference, which is why I talked about the healthcare professional conveyances earlier. I wouldn't want to judge each conveyance in isolation, but when you look at it as a whole, you just know there's something to be done here.
Thanks on that, Stephen. I think it does, and all the conversations, it is that there's a frustration, I think, both in terms of making sure that we get the resources and then able, as you say, that we don't lose this one, because we've got a level of momentum. Considering the question, we have a point for questions from the. If you're okay to hold, there will be a time to be able to come back with questions when we're at the end. So if you can hold that would be absolutely fantastic. I'll stay within the Governor ring fence now to see if there's anything further for Liz or anything further more generally on patient care. No, there you go, Liz. I think you've assured your colleague governors very, very well, which will allow us to then move on to the second theme with Subu, which is around our people and people enjoying working at CCAM. So Subu, and morning, Subu.
Thanks, Chair. I'm Subu Shanmuganathan. I'm the Chair of People Committee. So again, you have the report in front of you. I'll just focus on 3 key chunks that were discussed at People Committee in September. The HR function and the diagnostic that was completed was one of our key areas for that committee. And I think the committee had a lot of assurance that it was the right diagnostic, focusing on the right areas. I think things have moved on somewhat since then, and Simon has already talked to you about a HR improvement plan. And I think the committee asked for more assurance that that plan eliminates any optimism bias, so that we have a very realistic plan and we have a realistic time frame. So there was quite a lot of discussion about that, and I think there was a lot of challenge in the committee around the diagnostic itself, in terms of we've seen that diagnostic before. There's nothing different in here that we didn't know about. Are we assured that actually it's going to turn into a plan that can be delivered? So that was a key part of that conversation. The second chunk was around culture and focusing particularly on heart and on EOC. And again, the committee wanted to know whether there was a lot of openness and transparency about the culture in heart, and whether we were going to have a plan that was going to address the key issues. So we had a reasonable level of confidence that there was openness about what the issues were, and there was a plan to address those. We will want to have more assurance, I think, in people committees further down the line that that plan is being delivered, and that is on our agenda to look at that in more detail. Similarly, EOC, to look at that in more detail, and I think things have progressed as a result of some focus on that culture. So there was some assurance that things are moving on in EOC as well. The trade unions, and I think, again, we would like more assurance that there is progress being made in the relationship with the unions. I think I'm going to ask for perhaps some further evidence around the data, around some of the cases, around our grievances and disciplinaries, to give us more assurance that things are moving in the right direction around that. I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Thanks, Subu. Let's opening up. Oh, so Simon, by all means.
And in acknowledging the work around EOC, thank you for bringing it to our attention. I completely forgot to say that one of the results of that work has been we've managed a consistent delivery of the call answering time, which had been a consistent issue for the organisation over the last year. and I forgot to pay tribute in my performance update on that work, which is, as you know, one of the things people expect of us is to be able to pick up the phone when they call, and that I think has been demonstrated in that improved performance. So I just felt badly about not saying thank you to all the work that had gone on to get us back into a better place on that. That was the thing I wanted to add for now.
Thanks, Simon. I'm going to go over to Harvey.
Thank you. Sibo, we've talked about having an HR improvement plan, and I think you rightly said the diagnostic probably produced exactly the same things as previous diagnostics, etc. I wonder if you could just give us your view as to what is going to be different for our people once we've put the plan in place. Because HR is a whole range of things. Personally, I hate the title HR, so that's one of the things I'd change, but that's a different story. What is going to be the headline changes where our people are actually going to say, yes, this is fixed?
So it's a really interesting question that you ask, Harvey. And funnily enough, at the most recent People Committee yesterday, we asked exactly the same thing of each other. You know, what is going to be different about this HR improvement plan? And as Simon has already said, you know, it's a 2-year plan. Nothing is going to change overnight. There's a lot of work that needs to go into it. I think we needed some assurance that we weren't going to wait for the staff survey in April to know that we were on track and that things were changing. So me personally as an NED, you know, if I go out and I talk to staff and I go on visits and they come and talk to me about things, you know, I'd like to hear from them, you know, how do things, you know, feel? A good example of that was on a visit to Medway that I made, you know, a few months ago, and staff told me that things felt quite different. What was different? Well, we're being consulted about this. There's a reward and recognition system. You know, we're having conversations about our culture. It feels like we're a bit more of a team. It feels like I can raise concerns. So that to me tells me that things are starting to change. We're a long way from home, but staff telling us how they feel makes a big difference. I think the other big change in the HR improvement plan is that there is collective responsibility. This is not just the job of Sarah Wainwright, our interim HR director. This is CCAM's responsibility. We all have a role to play in making sure that our HR function delivers what it needs to deliver, but also that our managers and our leaders are equipped and trained to be able to do their jobs in the best possible way. So, as you've rightly said, this is multifactorial. There are a number of things that are going to go into this, not just leadership and management training. We are, you know, rolling that out and doing that at all levels, but also some of the key things around compliance, you know, in employment relations, that we have the right capacity and capability in the team to be able to deliver those things, and also some of the culture areas that we have a plan and that plan is actually being delivered, and that means we have to persist with it and we have to have the difficult conversations, but again it is a collective responsibility, and really the committee will need to have continued assurance that everyone is playing their part.
It's not, right? Yeah, one of my particular interests, come from the world of performance management and development, is we have quite a focus on appraisals. We're not doing well on appraisals even now. But performance development, getting people to be able to do the job better, is a mix of encouragement, cajoling, training, but also reassurance and an understanding that we're investing in them. And I just wonder, we've got the measure of how many appraisals done, and that's great. But to me, the appraisal is just an annual summary. of everything that's happened, and it shouldn't have any surprises. There should be face-to-face discussions going on. Should we have a measure of that? And should that be perhaps a target? I leave the thought with you.
I think I don't disagree with that, Harvey, at all. One of the things that I would add is that the committee has been working on getting towards a culture dashboard, and I think the team has worked very hard to produce something that gives us a sense of where the organisation is, and I think some of that will feed into that, because it's more than just the metric, as you've rightly said. And so I think the culture dashboard, behind which sits a number of metrics, but that will give us more of a flavour and enable us to take a temperature check of the organisation at regular intervals across a whole range of things to say, you know, this is where the organisation is, and therefore those meaningful one-to-ones, aside from appraisals, will be quite important to that. Agree.
And Simon, you wanted to come in on that?
Just to completely support what Subo said and to add my own colour to it, I suppose. The first thing is that, as I said, the plan is a 2-year plan. And one of the first things is that we're all going to have to be collectively clear about what the priorities for change are. Now, those will be published at the board meeting in October, and they're subject to debate. They'll be debated at the People Committee. They'll be debated. They were debated last week in the board development session. We had an exercise of asking our senior leaders what they wanted to see from the improvement plan, which will clearly figure fairly highly in our thoughts. And I'd say probably one of the biggest differences I and the team are trying to make is no decision about you without you. So we had some of the people who experience probably the most challenging parts of HR in the room with us last week at the board development session, and rather than saying, this is our plan, mark our homework, we said, what would you like to be in the plan? And I think that gave us some quite profound insights into some of their issues. And one thing to end on a kind of slightly more nuanced note, I suppose, in this part, there was some pretty strong feedback. Don't think everything's bad everywhere. As Subo's just said, the experience in Medway feels very different. So I think one of the key features of the plan needs to be, we need to be far more targeted with our interventions in areas where we've got challenges and difficulties, rather than assuming that everything is the same everywhere, which it isn't.
You prompted a good discussion already, and I think, Karen, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. I'm Karen, one of the new non-executive directors, and what struck me in relation to this topic at my first meeting was there was a very interesting presentation about proposals to develop professional supervision for all the clinicians in the organisation and how they're planning to build on that. And I think that does speak into your question about how you support people through the year, in that they've got somebody that they can be working with on a regular basis for the clinical aspects of their work. So I think I would commend that as something that we would want to encourage.
Thanks. Looking around the room, is that a point up, Martin?
Can I ask a more specific thing about heart? And put it in this way. Are the NEDs assured that our badge it as a cultural development plan, which just refers to in the report as issues, but I take it as meaning the same thing, is robust in light of the statement in there that they have a reasonable level of confidence that the plan will address the required levels. A reasonable level of confidence doesn't sort of immediately give you the impression that, you know, everything is quite as it should be. I mean, it's an interesting one because I had the privilege of going to see one of the heart teams, and I found a very positive attitude there, personally. And I think that there's perhaps, reflecting on it, a more generic issue about the way that leaders at all levels, to use that term, are identified and recruited. In other words, what the criteria is that makes a good person in a leadership role, whether they're leading one person or a whole team. Because if you go back to culture, through our own experience and also talking to people, it's very much influenced by who they're working to. So I wonder whether there's a bigger piece of work going on somewhere which says, how do we actually recruit the people who manage other people? So I suppose I've wrapped two things in there. One is that generic second point, but the also is to pick up on this thing about a reasonable level of confidence, specifically in relation to heart.
Thank you, Martin. And I'm heartened to hear that on your visit, you found that they were in good spirits. That's good to hear. I think the poor people who attend People Committee and get challenged by us as NEDs will tell you that the reason that statement is in there is that we would like to see more evidence and more data that indeed that plan is being delivered, and that is our intention. So hence why we can say there's a reasonable level of confidence, but it's a bit like the EOC plan, if I'm honest. We saw a plan, so I have reasonable confidence, but actually until I see some of it being delivered and I can see the evidence of that, I'm not going to say that we have full assurance. So I would like the Heart team, whoever's leading that, to come back, talk to People Committee and tell us about that plan and what has been delivered and how, and if they can evidence what impact that has had. And then I think we can say we have a higher level of confidence that things are actually working in Heart.
So can I just follow up on
Please.
the second point about the criteria way how people are selected? Because this has come up before. I don't think it's come up too recently, but I remember this coming up before about the criteria by which people. But what is never evident to me is we have these conversations, but so what? What happens? Does anything happen, or does it the same now as it was when I joined 2.5 years ago?
So my apologies, I forgot.
Sorry.
I got so distracted and excited about Heart. So as far as recruitment is concerned, so that is a core part of the HR improvement plan, that we will look at recruitment as well and review our policies on that. But aside from that, we had an interesting conversation yesterday at the most recent People Committee, as it happens, about career development, career progression and talent management. And so how do we know we have the right people, that they are being promoted into the right roles, and that is in line with our values? So values-driven recruitment will be a key part of that. Kindness, compassion, courage, those are all the key things that are going to be important for our recruitment so that we get the right leaders. So there's an aspect to this which is around training, and we acknowledge that, and we have all of those wheels in motion to ensure that we get the right training in place. And as you know, we haven't had the right training in place for some years prior to the last 2 to 3 years. So we've made progress on that. But equally, it's about ensuring that we have a talent management pipeline and a career progression and career development pathway where people can see themselves staying at CCAM and moving upwards. But those people are the right people that we have identified as having the right attributes to be in the talent pipeline.
Which leads to the selection mechanism, of course. Whether, it's a half-hour conversation or whether it's an assessment centre which actually looks about things like interactions in teams and things like this. I'm just going on the basis of personal experience back when I was in an ambulance setting, that one of the most important things you needed to do in recruitment was observe how people interact with other people, not just see whether they say the right things and tick the box when you're asking them the questions and do they say the right words. And I don't know what the situation is here, but obviously one is a more labour-intensive process, but you could argue that actually if you get that bit wrong, it doesn't matter how many marvellous policies you'll have, it'll still be down to having used the wrong selection method and criteria to put in place the people who shape the culture.
Thanks. With that has changed, I can bring you in, Angela. I think, Simon, did you want to...
You go first. Angela's first. After you.
Angela.
Thank you. My question for Subo probably picks up on both the implementation of policy and having the right people in the right places, actually. So as my appointed governor role for education, I want to raise a question around the sexual safety policy and other routes for raising concerns. So we have the really clear new sexual safety policy, great campaign, the posters are fantastic, it's all looking great from that perspective, and we also have existing processes for raising concerns such as racism issues. To give context to my question, but don't worry, I'm not going to go into any detail, I am aware of 2 students who've raised cases since April, one sexual safety case, one to do with alleged racist language used in front of a student of colour. I'm aware that both of those outcomes, well, we've had to chase for them and haven't probably quite followed policy in the way that outcomes are being delivered back, but both leave me slightly concerned in that neither of those issues were deemed to have met a threshold for going forward for formal action, which is the feedback that we're having to give back to the students who've needed a lot of bravery and support to speak up and raise this and change base site away from the mentors, etc., etc. I have raised it through the appropriate channels with my Dean hat on through CCAM, so colleagues are having every opportunity to respond to us through the normal operational channels, but obviously as a governor I couldn't really not raise it here as well. So my question really, Subo, is are you assured regarding the effectiveness of the implementation of the sexual safety policy, and also are you assured that the people considering concerns regarding, for example, racism are appropriately trained and supported to make those considerations to the level we would hope? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Angela. First, let me say I'm really sorry about the experiences of those 2 students. That's not what we want for our students, or indeed for our people, or indeed for our patients. So I'm very sorry to hear about that. As far as the Sexual Safety Charter is concerned, I'm assured, I think the People Committee is assured that we have one, first of all, and that is a big step forward for us. And Margaret DL leads that work, so it's sitting in the right place, I think, organisationally. As far as the policies around how the complaints are dealt with and then how we act on the learning from those, I don't think we can say we're assured. And the fact that these cases still keep coming up is enough of a worry to tell us something still is not right. We know we have some work to do on these things, so it's really going to be, again, a key part of our HR improvement plan. That is the 2-year plan. That will include precisely those things, looking at, have we got the right processes in place? Have we trained our managers in the right way to undertake those investigations? And are we picking up the learning from these things and then acting on those learnings from each of those cases? I don't think we have the assurance yet that all of that is happening. I think it will be part of this 2-year plan. And again, some of that is around things like, what are the consequences? Do we have the right sanction? And, people have said it before, the culture in an organisation is the lowest thing that you will tolerate. If we tolerate sexual behaviours like that, if we tolerate racism, that's what speaks to our culture. So we have to eliminate those things. So that will be part of how do we ensure that we take the right action. So my sort of concise answer is, no, I'm not assured, but I am assured that the right policies and charters are in place, but I need more evidence that we are coming out with the right outcomes from those investigations and acting upon them in the decisive way that we need them to.
Thanks, Subo. So obviously outside of here, the action I need to take is, are we assured as higher education institutions that our students are in a safe environment? So that's the assurance I'm seeking outside of this board, well, actually on behalf of all of them, as I am the education representative, because there is a question mark over that at the moment, but thank you.
Simon, you want to come in? I can see Martin wants to come in. I'll also add a comment, and I've got Kirsty, so we're keeping an eye on the time, but Simon first.
So I think very happy to follow up with you directly. We shouldn't talk about individual cases in this context, so let's leave that conversation outside of here. And if we need to speak, we can obviously do so. No ambulance trust, I think, would say, and nor should it claim, that it has got assurance on this issue. It is only, I think, less than 12 months since the National Review into Ambulance Services Culture was published, and everybody is engaged on a debate on this. There are a wide spectrum of views as to what the appropriate responses are, and we need to continue the organisational conversation about how do we respond and are we responding well. And I would say there will be times when we get that response right, there will be times when we get it wrong, and we need to hold our hands up when we do. And there will be things that we need to continue to learn, both internally and thanks to the questions that stakeholders and partners raise with us. So I would absolutely be clear that, you know, how could we say we know we've got this tape when we're still, you know, we're at the start of this journey, not the end of it. What I am convinced about, like Subo, is that we've got an outstanding leader in Margaret who is absolutely focused on this. And I know takes a personal interest in all the concerns that are raised. So we need to continue to keep our minds focused on it and continue the conversation. We had a board development session on it earlier on this year in which we had external input from our national lead trying to help us calibrate our response and help us think through what are the appropriate mechanisms and responses when we get a challenge in this space. And your question rightly reminds us that we said we would have a part 2 of that session to continue the conversation and continue to learn. But on your specific questions, if there are things that you and I need to talk about, very happy to do that.
We come up to Martin and then I'll come back to Kirsty.
Yes, I mean, obviously the specifics of this are not appropriate when up to us operating at the governance level. But at a governance level, it raises the question about who champions the student voice in the organisation. Because, I mean, of various conversations we've had here in the past, I'm not getting a sense of who champions them. Because obviously, as we talked about, and I think was the last one, they're in a position where some of them at least, presumably would want some jobs with us. So there's a power imbalance all over the place. So my question is there a champion in the trust for those particularly vulnerable group of people? I'm not particularly talking sexually now, maybe nothing to do with sexually, it could be anything. But I'm just not getting a sense of anyone championing them to the trust, because surely, just generically, if someone was doing that, someone would be fighting their corner in this specific case. So without going into specific case, it's what's the championship bit? Because if I was a parent, I would be, I am a parent, but not a parent of anyone who's going to be coming here as a paramedic, I don't think. I would be worried.
Simon, you want to come back in? Suba, you might want to know. Also, Angela, opinion again.
We have, so I met as part of the work earlier on this summer. So we do have, obviously, champions in the organisation. So in addition to Margaret, the clinical education lead speaks on behalf of the students. And we held discussions with the university about this very topic to make sure that their voices were heard. In addition, so that function is built, hardwired into, they speak on behalf of the students internally. And I met with them to hear concerns and issues that were raised. In addition, of course, we have and will continue to provide freedom to speak up, reach out, that is not just waiting for concerns to come up through the formal route, but also allowing students speak directly to Kim, our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. And as you know, I meet with Kim on a monthly basis, so I hear of those issues when they come up too. And we build that into our ongoing work in terms of organisational development. And as I think Subo said, all of that will be hardwired back into the HR improvement plan that will come before board in October. So we do have a dedicated lead for education. That dedicated lead has a link to Margaret. Margaret has obviously a link to me. Kim has a link to me. And so I think the mechanisms are in place. What will always be nuanced and much more difficult are the individual cases, and I've already acknowledged some of those we will get right or wrong.
So the individual students can go to the champion, because obviously, I mean, at the director level, the student paramedic's not going to go to someone. So so it's not just a question of like collective championship, it's individual championship for somebody who's on placement in the trust.
I'll bring you back up. I'm just wondering, because is your point in relation to this, or is that, okay, I will also then see, Suba, did you want to add anything further to that Simon said?
Yeah, no, I think Simon's covered most of it. The one thing that I will say is that students have mentors, they do have supervisors, obviously, and they are based in particular areas. But the way I see it is that it is symptomatic of what is wrong with the culture to begin with, because it shouldn't happen, because they are not the only vulnerable group, and there are women, people of colour, and others who have protected characteristics. And if we can't look after all of those people, then that is an indictment on us. So for me, whilst, of course, we want our students to have a good experience and we should be looking after them, there are a number of factors that underpin the experiences that they're having, and that is all to do with our culture, and we need to get all of those right. And so in the short term, we're going to be trying to work on them and deal with them as individual cases, but I think in the long term, it is that 2-year improvement plan that we need to get right in order to improve it for everyone.
Thanks, Suba. Angela.
Thanks. Yeah, just to be clear, the mention of any specific cases was only for context of my question. I don't want to address those at all. And the question was about the implementation of the policy, not eradicating any issues in the whole of the ambulance service. I'm realistic about that. Won't take up the meeting talking about student support, but the other issue I just wanted to make, unless they are apprentices, the students are owned, if you like, by the higher education institution, by the university. So they have an extensive support network at the university. And yes, they have all of those other routes with the ambulance service. They're very unlikely to go up to the education need again because of the power imbalance that you talk about. But there are a number of support services, and we work really closely. So don't have too much concern about that, actually. But yeah, just being clear, it's about the implementation of the policy that you've got, I was asking about, rather than fixing the whole problem immediately. Thanks.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to come over. Kirsty, just aware of time as well.
So mine is really just a quick one. So mine is about the grievances. It's just seeking some assurance that, so the report says there's 63 outstanding grievances, 2 of which are legacy. Just seeking some assurance that the staff that have submitted those grievances, looking at the timeline of the mean case length, that the staff are getting the support. Just seek some assurance that that is happening, because it seems a long time to have a grievance. Even if the mean is 8 to 7 days, that's still a long time for a grievance.
Thanks, Kirsty. I think it's fair to say we haven't cracked the grievances and disciplinaries area yet. Having said that, there is some work to look at the long-standing cases, that are taking, 1 year, 2 years, and that are still outstanding. So there is some dedicated work going on to do and tackle those. So I think there's some partial assurance that there is a plan, but in order to get full assurance, we'd like to see the impact of that and that those have been cleared. And similarly, again, and I referred to this already as part of the HR improvement plan, it's to look at the capacity and capability of the team that are dealing with that. And compliance is a very particular issue. It requires a lot of expertise and experience in those sorts of cases. And so I think that is something that we need to address and look at. In terms of other staff being supported, I don't think we've asked that specific question, to be honest with you, at People Committee. But now that you have raised it, I think I'll put that on my radar as a question to ask. Thank you.
Thank you all for, I think, a really, really helpful exchange, really helpful challenge, really helpful questions asked. And I will just add to Martin, when you were asking about that reasonable level, and I think Simon gave good context for it. This is a national issue. I think one part of it. I think another part, when we did have we had a development session on it last week, and we were given anonymised data from across ambulance trusts. There is one trust, I'm not sure which one it is, which is performing very well. So the idea of how good can good be, I think there's a recognition that this isn't a lost fight. This is something that we can turn around and we will turn around. Simon has given it that 2-year framework, but equally Subbu has talked about the People Committee wanting to be able to see clear evidence of progress from day one, and that we will be looking for that, as we will be looking for pulse surveys and other assessments to be able to see more broadly how it's moving on. I'd also again say thank you, because another role I have at London Met, where we had a not dissimilar issue 2-3 years back. We used a people strategy to be able to drive change, but it was governance that was able to make sure it was you as governors and for us as non-execs making sure we keep our eye on this. We continue on with it. So thank you for that. And we will come back to this, and don't be afraid when we come through these. That's why we're doing it in this thematic way. And when we come back and Subbu reports again in the future, to be able to continue to ask what have been very, very pertinent and relevant questions. So thank you for that. Mindful that we've got lots of things. There's going to be lunch, photographs, just everything's happening. So we do need to be able to finish for noon. We are a sustainable partner that would have been Howard presenting this, but in Howard's absence, Michael has very kindly agreed to step in. Over to you, Michael.
Okay. Yeah, and I will be brief. So the exam question I have is sustainable partner, and I just want to say, what does that mean? So there are two fundamental aspects to it. Are we a financially resilient organisation, and do we work as an effective partner within the NHS system? So if I start with the second one, I think you've heard from Simon, you've heard from Usman, and you've heard from other colleagues. I would say that we are assured that CCAM is an effective partner in terms of the engagement that it has with other parts of the NHS system, particularly in the South East, but more widely in terms of the ambulance community, and I'd also say with NHS England. For those of you, I've said I've been around for about 5 years now, and look around the room, I think Harvey, you're probably of the same vintage, and what I'd say was we are in a completely different place than we were 5 years ago in terms of our engagement with the wider system, and I get that in the limited contact that I still have. So on that we are assured. On the second aspect, which is financial resilience, this is a difficult one. So this issue is covered by the Finance and Investment Committee that Howard chairs and I attend. I want to give assurance firstly to the wider community who may be watching this, that when we look at financial decisions and long-term financial sustainability, we don't do it in isolation. I'm very pleased to say that Liz sits on the Finance and Investment Committee. So every time we look at financial issues, we are seeking to look at them through the lens of patients and the quality of medical care. So I want to give that assurance, and that will continue under Howard's leadership. We are an organisation that is in deficit. That deficit is approved by the system. And my experience is if you are in deficit, you need tight control. You need tight control, but you also need to have a culture that empowers the organisation, its people, to come up with solutions. So we're always looking at the level of balance there between tight control and people engagement. Why do we need tight control? Now, the first thing I'd say is that we are assured as a committee that CCAM has a plan, a short-term plan to get us through the remainder of this financial year. But I would remind Council that the whole emphasis of the strategy is to improve patient care, but to do that in a financially sustainable way. It is a 3-year programme to get us back into financial balance. But we are focusing at the moment on the current year and the remaining 6 months of this year. So there are a number of risks that we need to be alert to. As I said, we have a plan, but that plan is underpinned by a significant SIP cost improvement programme to the extent of 23 million, which is quite considerable. Where we have been seeking assurances that where some of those efficiencies come from the back office, they are not at the extent to which our support services are reduced or impeded in a way that they do not support the people at the front line. And we've had discussions here about having a credible, effective HR support system, but that extends across the whole of the organisation, whether it's supporting fleet or training and education. So the assurance that we've got is that the cost improvement programme is about improving value for money. It's not about reducing service, and that is an important principle that we will continue to watch for going forward. We are 6 months into the financial year, so the remaining 6 months are very important to us. And while I say that we have a plan within CCAM, there are a number of variables out there that could knock us off course. Ray referred to the establishment of the hubs. We still do not yet know whether that 2 million will come to us. We have the winter coming. Again, we don't know what level of activity that could bring. So while I am assured, or Howard and I are assured, that we are in control of our finances in terms of we have got all the right levers in place and the governance around that, what we are constantly focusing on is where something new happens or that the organisation is sufficiently flexible and agile enough to respond to new developments as they arise over the coming months. We're also focusing on some of the enablers that ensure that the organisation is financially resilient. A key one is digital. We've had reference to the Darcy review and the emphasis there on using digital to improve service delivery. But it's not just about service delivery, it's getting better value for money from NHS money or taxpayers' money. Like a lot of the ambulance service, I think CCAM has been behind in the past in terms of its digital approach and its digital strategy. We were lucky to get our current Director of Digital Services who has joined us, and we have already seen the early elements of a digital strategy, which we've reviewed. We are assured that that is moving in the right direction. The next level of assurance is implementation of that strategy and whether that can be delivered within a realistic timetable to ensure that our people are supported, but in the same way our digital infrastructure is in place to make sure that the hubs and our strategy are really effective. And the final point I'd touch upon is I would say that I chair the audit committee. I'm not convinced that in the past some of the controls that CCAM have been effective, and I mean these in the context of procurement and a whole range of other support activities. We have a good finance director, and I was very pleased, as I know Howard was, when he came to us and said, we need to do something about our overall control environment within CCAM. He has a plan to address that. You would not be surprised that both the Finance and Investment Committee and the Audit Committee will be very much focusing on the implementation of that plan to ensure that our control environment is much stronger than it has been in the past. I think that's all I'd like to say, Chair, but very happy to take questions.
Very, very ably covered for Howard. Thank you so much for doing that, Michael. Let's see if there are questions. I can see two out there. Kirsty, then Ray. We've got 4 minutes, and then Martin. So you've got about 90 seconds each, roughly.
So hopefully mine is going to be really, really quick. And mine is, just can I seek some assurance that you're confident that we are going to deliver our efficiency target that we've set this year?
No, I'm not the finance director, Kirsty. I don't think, given the volatility that's out there, am I 100% assured? No. Am I assured that everybody is doing all they can to deliver that efficiency programme? Yes, they are. And am I assured that they're doing that in a way that is seeking to avoid any adverse impact on patient care? Yes, I am. But can I, I'm not going to say, because you'll hold me to account in 6 months' time. So, yeah, thank you.
Then let's take Ray second.
Just following on from that in sort of detail, in the report, it refers to seeking further assurance about delivery of SIP, particularly the £19 million non-cash releasing element of it, which is the biggest chunk. Can you tell us how you feel in terms of assurance delivering that?
Again, we haven't got all the information that I would like at this point. So from my previous executive experience, if you haven't got clarity, absolute clarity around how you're going to be delivering efficiency savings halfway through the financial year, historically most organisations will not deliver. What we've seen is that there are really good plans in place, and we are assured about that. It's just my professional, and I know Howard's professional experiences, we need to be constantly looking at this over the next few months to be absolutely confident that it's delivering in that space, because it is quite a big offering, and some of it is around, while it's system change, it also has impact on the way in which people do their work. So it's really what we're looking for is, are we getting buy-in from within the organisation that some of these changes are going to be delivered. The plans are there. I'm assured on the plans. There is clarity about what needs to be done. It's been absolutely certain that we are getting buy-in from the rest of the organisation, and that the organisation do not feel that they've been unduly pressurised to do certain things.
I'll bring in Martin just before I do. Simon, if you wanted to.
Just to say, the assurance that we can give, and I completely back up what Michael has said, is unlike pretty much every other organisation in the South East, we are on plan year to date. Now, that is no small achievement given the operating environment in which we are existing and the level of activity pressure that we've already seen. The point I would make is that we are consistently protecting the front line from, because obviously our duty is still to make sure that we put the hours out on the road. So we will never duck that duty. And I've called out the tensions I think that will exist later on in the year if activity continues to rise. And the other thing that you can take assurance from is that we are putting that challenge where it needs to be put, which is in our ICB partners, because we are integrally hooked to them in terms of our ability to deliver our control total. So back to what Michael said, are we doing everything that we can on our side of the aisle to deliver? From my point of view as the accounting officer, I am assured that we are doing that.
Thanks, Simon. Let's come to Martin then.
Thank you. I hear and understand what Simon said and what Michael said about assurance at this point in time. A couple of things occur to me though, that if demand is running at 7% as opposed to 3%, what does that mean for operating expenditure versus other expenditure? Because presumably it's got to be covered somewhere. And this is in the context of the statement that we were given for last year, whereby operation expenditure was 18.6 million greater, which caused the problem. Because in the first quarter, there was an overall positive, if you like, but within that, there was an operational expenditure overspend. So the question is really, are the NEDs assured that while things on the, you might call the macro level are fine, there isn't actually an operating expenditure underlying a problem that might ultimately cause a need for a rebasing? Because I think there's a need to drill down just between, because in June, some income conveniently came in which offset the overspend in the operating expenditure. Well, that's a timing issue.
I don't think it's a timing issue totally, and you know, it's a good challenge, Martin, and Howard's better at me at the detail. He is quite vociferous in the way in which he will go into that and try to find out explanations. The only thing I'd say is it's an interesting question you raise about changes in level of demand. Demand may go up, but your response to that demand may be different, and I think that's what the strategy is about, is how do you manage our response to demand in a way that is both cost effective but meets the patient need. And I think that's where I think there's uncharted territory at the moment, and we need to be focusing very much on that from a quality perspective, that patients don't lose out. But for me, it's around the run rate. Is the run rate being really well managed? And I think the jury's still out on that, to be frank.
Yeah, I mean, I understand obviously the strategies, but that's a longer term piece of work. But I mean, mine was more short term in this particular instance about, you know, because round about this time last year there was a rebasing. And what I'm hearing is we're not there now, but nevertheless we have a history whereby operating expenditure blows everything else is fine and dandy, but operating expenditure blows the casket at the end.
So that's still clearly a risk this year. I mean, I've already been clear, I think, Martin, that the pressure of operating demand in the context of delivering an ambitious SIP programme is really significant. And have we got that entirely within our control? No, because we've agreed a plan that is not entirely within our control to deliver. It requires others to deliver us around us, which is why I keep coming back to this point. It is also for others to help mitigate the demand, and which is why Stephen's intervention, I think, was so helpful, because that is a way of collectively starting to manage demand and hence manage cost. There are also things we need to do: increase our see and treat rate, increase our hear and treat rate, and that's also within the strategy. That's why Michael's point is completely correct. All of those things have to happen simultaneously. There is not an NHS organisation around us, whatever colour of organisation they may be, that is not struggling with the same issues. They may manifest differently. And I keep coming back to the fact that we should take some comfort, not certainty, some comfort from the fact that year to date we are on plan and still delivering. And it is an absolute watchword that we will continue to keep that under our closest scrutiny.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Martin. Zach, I'll give you...
I think just after hearing about those three very fundamental aspects that definitely play a huge role in the integrated quality report, from an overall perspective, I wanted to ask, is the board satisfied with the overall outcome of the IQR?
Simon, you start, and I'm going to then...
So, without wanting to... if I give a one-word summary, if I'd have been given this position at the start of the year 5 months in, yes, I would be satisfied with the position we are in year to date. Because if you look at what we've done in the first 5 months of the year, we've delivered a strategy that everybody's signed up to. We have a plan to implement that strategy. We've got a believable but challenging plan for the money. And most importantly of all, we have continued to hit, when others have not, our core clinical delivery targets. Those, if you like, are the trifecta of things that you need to keep in mind. I would say the most important of which for the organisation in the long term is, does it have a credible strategy that if it implements it, if it is allowed to implement it, will bring it to a sustainable place? And I would say yes. I think we can, as a board, you as a council can be rightly proud of the work. We see it more often, Usman and I, on your behalf, that has been done to get the strategy into a place where nobody is saying we disagree. They're just saying, how do we execute? And that's a pretty positive place for us to be. And also internally, I know from our people that that strategy commands support. So that's the other part of it. Do people look at this strategy and think, yeah, if we can do this, it will make a difference? And I know that they do.
Thanks. Very, very good pulling together question, I have to say, Zach. And I would just add to that, you know, the levels of assurance, I think there's absolute and relative. And having absolute assurance, I think it's very difficult to have because of the number of moving parts, and also because of, for the older people around the room will remember the Donald Rumsfeld's known knowns and known unknowns. And there are both known knowns and known unknowns out there in relation to the level of demand and the nature of the demand, but also in relation to partners around us who Simon has already said are not in. They would give their eye and teeth for the position we're in, and they're not in it, and they could easily come knocking on the door. So there's a number of things in play, but I can be as assured as I could be. I think both of us at this point in time, but we just need to be able to absolutely keep our eye on the ball going forward. And I think this process with our governors is a very important part of it, and has been very, very helpful this morning. I'm minded that, especially the governors, you haven't got long until you need to do your photos. Luckily, us at the front bench have already done our hair, so we're good to go. But you might need to all go and find cloakrooms before you go on. But before I do that, just to say, I've not had any AOBs. Is there an AOB that you have, Kirsty?
Mine is literally just a quick one. I'd just like it noted, and from the council, our thanks to pass on to Chris Burton, that has done 2 terms as a governor but has recently retired. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. Thanks for remembering that. And yes, absolutely, we should do that, and we'll minute that. Other than that, not advised of any questions in advance from the public, but absolutely aware that there's a question pending from audience. So if you want to be able to ask your question now, then we would love to be able to hear that.
Just hold that for you. Okay. So it was just really to understand off the back of what was discussed about the HCP referrals, what's going on in terms of almost marketing how the ambulance service stands now to the public and to system partners and other agencies, because a lot of the work that we get in the EOC is calls from nursing homes where they're looking for a second opinion. There's failed discharges. There's other agencies that aren't taking accountability for what should be their job, and that's increasing the pressure that we have, and therefore the operational output and manpower is being increased, and therefore the budget. So what's being done to almost make people aware of what we're actually capable of and what our scope of practice is?
It's a really good question. Do you mind saying your name? Is that all right?
It's Jocelyn.
Hello, Jocelyn. It's a really good question. One of the biggest things that I think is a consequence of our strategy, we've done the first thing, so we've got people to agree this is the right approach. The second, and I don't think this is to be underestimated, is there's a massive public education campaign that is going to be needed, which is why our ICB partners are so important, to help educate people about how to use the health service responsibly. Because when people think about the health service, fundamentally, they think about 2 things, 3 things maybe. Ring 999, or now 111, because 111 is pretty popular. Go to your A&E department, or try and get to see your GP or primary care. And the reality is that that's just only 3 ways. There are now multiple ways and better ways that we now need to get people to respond. Stephen gave an example earlier on. Our care homes think that the default response is to ring 999 and get an ambulance and take that elderly person to hospital. And oftentimes that's absolutely not the best response. So we need to have solutions that work at a general level, public education, but to defray some of the demand that you and your colleagues experience, we're also going to need to pick up and deal with some of those solutions at a much more individual level, where we know we get big patterns of demand coming through. That is going to take us some years to achieve. You know, people are very grooved. Our population is very grooved in what they expect to do and what they will do. And I won't promise you that we're going to change that overnight. I will say that given enough time and given some of the right technology, so one of the things Liz said is probably my biggest cause for hope. Technology does have the power to change the way people behave. Think about, I think you said it was 320, Liz, people who cancelled their call as a result of receiving the welfare text. That's the cause for hope. And we need to do much more of that going forward. But very happy to come and meet with you and your colleagues and talk about that. Thanks for that question. It's a really great one.
Thanks Jocelyn. I have another question on right-hand side.
I'm Julian Weeks, Crowborough CFR. We've heard that demand's going up, money's staying the same. Earlier in the year, we cut ties with the private ambulance services. What plans are there in place to sort of cover that when it gets really busy over the winter period?
And I think I'll respond to that. I think a huge amount of planning went in before we cut that service. They mainly covered across the South Downs, and I've got someone in the room who knows all about that, and in Kent. But we had recruited additional paramedics and staff to cover that, to put additional hours on the road. We're monitoring it closely to make sure that there isn't a delay in response times in those areas. But currently, our operational hours on the road are covering that diminished hours that we were getting from the private ambulance provider.
Thanks again for the question. We'll pause in case. If not, then thank you very much. We have review of effectiveness of the meeting, which is we're about 13 minutes overrun. I have to take the mea culpa on that one. If there's anything else anyone wanted to add on it, but equally I do think it's really important to get the feedback on the meeting. So anyone wants to drop an email to Peter or myself, very happy to have that. And also just we're around today, so catch us to be able to say this worked, that didn't work. I personally felt it was a very helpful meeting, I have to say, as chair, and I think Simon would agree, as would non-exec and exec colleagues around the table. So that was very helpful. Thank you so much. We will continue. We're very happy to keep modifying and adjusting if colleagues feel that we need to be able to do that. Other than that, just to say, I now have to read out. Lunch is downstairs, direct toward the back of the room. And then remind governors that their photo time slot is 12:20 to 12:35. So you either have to eat quickly, or we all get to eat first, and we'll leave you. We'll keep you a sandwich or two because we're on at 12:45. Thank you all very much, and look forward again to your contributions this afternoon. I think it'll be very good. And thank you to the public joining us.